What if I told you the greatest military minds in history didn't rely on sheer numbers or raw power to win their battles? Instead, they wielded something far more potent: strategy. Picture this: thousands of years ago, on dusty battlefields and rugged mountain passes, commanders orchestrated maneuvers so brilliant, their tactics are still taught in war colleges and business schools today. These weren't just fleeting tricks, they were masterpieces of deception, timing, and psychological warfare. And here's the astonishing part: these ancient strategies aren't relics of the past. They're alive, shaping modern conflicts, corporate rivalries, and even political campaigns. Think about Sun Tzu, the legendary Chinese general who wrote The Art of War over 2,000 years ago. His principles like appear weak when you are strong or attack where the enemy is unprepared aren't just dusty proverbs. They're used by Fortune 500 companies, sports coaches, and even chess champions. Or consider Hannibal, who crossed the Alps with elephants to outmaneuver Rome, a move so audacious it's studied as a textbook example of surprise and adaptability. These weren't just battles, they were chess games played with human lives, where every move was calculated to outthink, not just outfight. So why do these ancient strategies still resonate? Because human nature hasn't changed. The same instincts that drove armies to clash at Thermopylae or Gaugamela still drive competition today, whether it's in warfare, business, or everyday life. Over the next 34 segments, we'll dissect these timeless tactics, revealing how they work and why they're still unbeatable. You'll see how deception won wars, how patience turned defeats into victories, and how understanding your enemy's mind can be more powerful than any weapon. This isn't just history, it's a playbook for outsmarting any challenge. So settle in, because the past is about to teach you how to master the present. One of the most deceptive yet devastating maneuvers in military history begins not with an advance but with a retreat, a carefully staged one. The Feigned Retreat is warfare's ultimate bluff, a psychological gambit that turns an enemy's confidence into their downfall. Picture this: a force suddenly breaks ranks, scattering in apparent panic. The opposing army, sensing victory, surges forward, only to find themselves funneled into a deadly trap. This wasn't just a tactic, it was theater where the illusion of weakness masked a lethal counterstrike. The Mongols elevated this art to perfection. Under leaders like Genghis Khan and Subutai, their horse archers would unleash a hail of arrows before seemingly fleeing in disarray. To their enemies, often heavier, slower armies, this looked like a rout. But the chaos was choreographed. As pursuers stretched their lines and abandoned defensive formations, Mongol riders would pivot, surrounding them from all sides. The result: battles like Khalkha River in 1223, where a much larger Kievan Rus force was annihilated by what appeared to be a retreating foe. The genius lay in understanding human nature. Pride blinds and momentum overrides caution. Yet this strategy wasn't exclusive to the steppes. Centuries earlier, the Carthaginian general Hannibal used a similar ruse at Lake Trasimene, luring Roman legions into a narrow pass before ambushing them from the hills. Even William the Conqueror feigned retreat at Hastings in 1066 to break the Saxon shield wall. The common thread: each commander weaponized their opponent's assumptions. When an army sees the enemy flee, discipline often crumbles in the rush to claim glory. That's why the feigned retreat isn't just about movement, it's about manipulating perception. Fast forward to modern times, and the principles remain shockingly relevant. During the Gulf War, coalition forces used tactical withdrawals to draw Iraqi troops into kill zones, while in business, companies sometimes retreat from markets only to reposition and dominate. The lesson transcends battlefields. Appearing vulnerable can be the ultimate strength, because whether in war, competition, or negotiation, the moment your opponent thinks they've won is often the moment they've lost. Divide and conquer. It sounds ruthless because it is. Few strategies have shaped history as profoundly as this simple but devastating principle. Fracture your enemy's unity, and you can dominate them piece by piece. The Romans didn't just perfect this tactic, they built an empire with it. Take Julius Caesar in Gaul. Facing a coalition of tribes that could have overwhelmed his legions, he didn't charge headfirst. Instead, he played a subtler game, exploiting rivalries, offering favors to some while crushing others, turning allies into enemies without them even realizing it. By the time the tribes understood what was happening, they stood alone, outnumbered and outmaneuvered. This wasn't just Roman ingenuity, it was human psychology in action. A united front is formidable, but so doubt, stoke old grudges, or dangle the right temptation, and cohesion crumbles. The British Empire later employed the same playbook, pitting local rulers against each other to maintain control with minimal force. Even in nature, predators instinctively isolate their prey from the herd. The principle is universal. Fragmentation creates vulnerability. Fast forward to the modern era, and you'll spot this strategy everywhere, just dressed in a suit instead of armor. Corporate raiders use it to break up rival companies, buying off key stakeholders before dismantling the rest. Politicians exploit divisions within opposing parties, amplifying internal conflicts to weaken their opponent's collective power. Even in tech, giants absorb smaller competitors one by one, ensuring no unified resistance emerges. The lesson, whether on a battlefield or a boardroom, the most effective victories often come not from overpowering your enemy, but from ensuring they never unite against you in the first place. But here's the twist: while divide and conquer is a weapon, it's also a warning. Every empire that relied on it, from Rome to Britain, eventually fell when their own divisions were exploited. Because the same tactic that builds power can just as easily destroy it. The real brilliance lies not just in wielding the strategy, but in recognizing when it's being used against you. Sometimes the most powerful weapon is not an army, but an empty room. The empty fort strategy is warfare's ultimate poker face, a gamble so bold it bends reality through sheer audacity. Picture this: a city's gates swing open, its walls unmanned, with only a lone figure calmly playing a lute atop the battlements. The approaching enemy, expecting resistance, halts in confusion. Surely this is a trap, they think, and with that doubt, victory slips through their fingers. This wasn't just a trick, it was psychological warfare distilled to its purest form. The master of this ruse was Zhuge Liang, the legendary strategist of China's Three Kingdoms period. Facing an overwhelming Wei army with barely a handful of troops, he didn't barricade the gates, he flung them wide. Sweeping the streets himself, he projected eerie tranquility while his enemy's scouts watched. General Sima Yi, known for his caution, took the bait. Convinced the emptiness concealed an ambush, he ordered a full retreat. The lesson: confidence can be as impenetrable as any wall. But this strategy isn't confined to ancient battlefields. In World War II, British intelligence famously used ghost armies, inflatable tanks, and fake radio traffic to convince the Nazis that invasion forces were massing where none existed. Today, cybersecurity experts deploy honeypots, decoy systems that lure hackers into wasting time attacking empty digital forts. Even in nature, animals like the pufferfish bluff their way to safety by appearing larger and more dangerous than they are. The brilliance of the empty fort lies in its inversion of logic. Normally, strength deters aggression, but here, the illusion of hidden strength does the work instead. It preys on an opponent's fear of the unknown. Their own imagination becomes your ally. That's why this tactic thrives wherever uncertainty exists. In business negotiations where a calm demeanor masks limited leverage, or in poker where a well-timed all-in bet can force folds from stronger hands. Yet there's a razor's edge to this strategy. It only works against those prone to overthinking a reckless foe might charge in regardless. Zhuge Liang knew Sima Yi's cautious nature was the real key to his success. Modern applications demand the same precision. A cybersecurity honeypot fails if the hacker recognizes the ruse, just as a poker bluff collapses against a caller with nothing to lose. The empty fort isn't about absence, it's about crafting the right absence for the right adversary. Because in the end, the most dangerous traps are the ones we convince ourselves are there. There's a grim elegance to the Scorched Earth strategy, a recognition that sometimes survival means destroying what you can't defend. Imagine an army in retreat, torching their own fields, poisoning wells, and leveling villages as they go. To an advancing enemy, the landscape transforms from a conquered prize into a barren wasteland. No food, no shelter, no supplies, just emptiness stretching for miles. This wasn't mere destruction. It was a calculated act of denial, turning the land itself into a weapon. Russia's defense against Napoleon in 1812 stands as history's most infamous example. As the French Grand Army pushed deeper into Russian territory, they found cities reduced to ashes and crops set ablaze. General Kutuzov's forces retreated deliberately, leaving nothing but hunger and winter in their wake. Napoleon's troops, accustomed to living off captured resources, soon faced starvation and freezing temperatures. By the time they reached Moscow, even that victory was hollow. The city was burning, and the French found themselves stranded in a frozen desert. Of the 600,000 men who crossed into Russia, fewer than 1 in 10 made it back. The lesson: sometimes the way to break an enemy isn't to fight them head-on, but to remove the very ground beneath their feet. Yet Scorched Earth isn't just about warfare. In business, companies like Netflix executed a modern version when they pivoted from DVD rentals to streaming, deliberately cannibalizing their own profitable model to stay ahead of disruption. Tech startups often burn through funding with no fallback plan, betting everything on breakthrough success. Even athletes use this mentality, cutting off any possibility of retreat to push through mental barriers. The core principle remains the same: eliminate comfort and you force adaptation. But here's the paradox: while Scorched Earth can save a kingdom or redefine an industry, it's a double-edged sword. Russia's victory came at a horrific cost to its own people. Just as corporate burn the ships moves can leave employees and customers stranded in the chaos. The strategy demands brutal honesty about what you're willing to lose and whether the end truly justifies the means, because in the ashes of what you destroy, you might just find the seeds of your own survival or your downfall. History's most famous gift wasn't wrapped in gold or silk. It was hollow, hiding an army within. The Trojan Horse stands as the ultimate symbol of deception, proving that sometimes the deadliest threats come packaged as generosity. Imagine the scene. After 10 grueling years of failed sieges, the Greeks appeared to sail away, leaving behind only this towering wooden offering. The Trojans, believing it a peace offering or tribute to their gods, dragged it inside their impenetrable walls. But when night fell, Greek soldiers crept out, opening the gates for their hidden comrades. By dawn, Troy was burning. This wasn't just a clever trick, it was a masterclass in exploiting human psychology, the blind spot where pride and curiosity override caution. What makes this strategy timeless isn't the wooden horse itself, but the principle it represents: the weaponization of trust. Throughout history, this playbook has been adapted countless times. During the Crusades, European knights reportedly hid in bread delivery carts to infiltrate Muslim strongholds. In World War II, Nazi Germany's Operation Grafe had English-speaking commandos wear Allied uniforms to sow chaos behind enemy lines. Today, this tactic thrives in cyberspace, where Trojan malware hides within seemingly harmless downloads or emails. The common thread: each exploits the target's willingness to let their guard down at the wrong moment. But here's the twist: the real genius wasn't in the construction of the horse, but in the Greeks' understanding of Trojan culture. They knew their enemies would interpret the horse through a religious lens, likely as an offering to Poseidon. This cultural insight turned an outlandish gamble into an inevitable victory. Modern applications demand the same precision. Cybersecurity experts warn that 90% of breaches start with phishing attacks that mimic trusted contacts. In business, corporate espionage often begins with flattery or fake partnerships. Even in nature, predators like anglerfish dangle glowing lures to attract prey. The Trojan horse's legacy teaches us that no defense is stronger than its most trusted point of entry. Firewalls crumble before a convincing login page, just as Troy's walls fell to a hollow gift. Yet there's a deeper lesson here about perception versus reality. The Greeks didn't just disguise soldiers, they disguised their entire withdrawal as defeat, playing on Troy's desire to believe the war was over. That's why this strategy transcends warfare. Magicians use similar misdirection, politicians frame concessions as victories, and marketers package ads as entertainment. The moment something appears harmless or beneficial is when we're most vulnerable to what hides inside. Perhaps the most chilling modern parallel lies in supply chain attacks, where hackers compromise software updates from trusted companies. Like the Trojans, we willingly bring these gifts into our digital homes, never suspecting the payload within. The antidote isn't paranoia, but vigilance, recognizing that trust must always be verified, not assumed. Because in the end, the Greeks didn't conquer Troy with superior strength. They won by understanding one universal truth: nothing disarms us faster than believing we've already won. Some victories aren't won with cannons or cavalry charges. They come from the quiet, relentless pressure of a noose tightening day by day. The Anaconda Plan, devised by Union General Winfield Scott during the American Civil War, was warfare at its most patient. Instead of chasing dramatic battles, Scott proposed something far more insidious: a two-pronged blockade. The Union Navy would seal off southern ports like a constricting snake, while ground forces took control of the Mississippi River, splitting the Confederacy in two. No grand assaults, just slow, methodical suffocation. Cotton couldn't be exported, weapons and supplies couldn't be imported. The South's economy, built on trade and agriculture, began to gasp for air. What made this strategy so devastating was its understanding of modern war. It wasn't just about defeating armies, but breaking the systems that sustained them. By 1863, southern cities faced starvation and hyperinflation. A single Confederate dollar was worth less than 5 cents in gold. Soldiers deserted not from cowardice, but because their families back home were starving. The Anaconda didn't just target troops, it targeted the very idea of Southern independence, proving that a nation could die not from 1,000 cuts, but from one prolonged squeeze. Yet this wasn't just a Civil War tactic. The same principles echo in modern economic sanctions, where nations like North Korea or Iran find themselves isolated by financial blockades far more effective than bombs. During World War II, the Allies' Atlantic blockade strangled Nazi Germany's access to vital resources like oil and rubber. Even in nature, the python doesn't crush its prey, it tightens incrementally, exploiting every exhale. The lesson: speed dazzles, but systemic pressure breaks. Businesses wield this strategy too. Tech giants like Apple slowly dominate markets by controlling supply chains, making competition impossible rather than competing directly. Streaming services drain cable TV's lifeblood, not with flashy ads but by steadily poaching subscribers. The Anaconda Plan teaches us that in any conflict, military, economic, or social, the most decisive victories often come from patience. Because when you control the flow of resources, you don't need to land the knockout punch. You just wait for your opponent to run out of air. But here's the counterintuitive brilliance: this strategy demands restraint. The Union faced criticism for lacking aggression, just as modern leaders face pressure to do something dramatic during crises. The Anaconda's success lay in resisting that impulse, understanding that true power sometimes means doing less but doing it longer and more thoroughly. Because in the end, the slow squeeze doesn't just defeat an enemy, it teaches them they were never truly in the fight to begin with. Few battle formations are as brutally efficient as the hammer and anvil, a tactic so straightforward yet devastating that it reshaped empires. Picture this: a disciplined infantry line locks shields, forming an immovable barrier that pins the enemy in place. Then, like a blacksmith strike, cavalry thunders in from the flank or rear, crushing the trapped forces between them. No retreat, no regrouping, just annihilation. Alexander the Great didn't just use this strategy, he perfected it, turning the battlefields of antiquity into his personal workshop where enemies were forged into defeat. At the Battle of Gaugamela in 331 BC, Alexander faced Darius III's sprawling Persian army, outnumbered nearly 5-1. But numbers meant nothing when the Macedonian phalanx, the Anvil, held the Persian infantry in a deadly embrace. Then Alexander himself led the companion cavalry, the Hammer, in a diagonal charge that shattered Darius's flank. The Persians, unable to advance or flee, collapsed inward like crumpled metal. This wasn't just a victory, it was a blueprint for domination, proving that precision and positioning could overwhelm sheer force. What makes the hammer and anvil timeless isn't its complexity, but its adaptability. Roman legions used variations of it to conquer Europe, with their heavy infantry holding lines while mobile auxiliaries struck from the sides. Napoleon refined it with artillery serving as the anvil and his famed cavalry as the hammer. Even in World War II, General Patton's armored divisions played the hammer to infantry's anvil during the Battle of the Bulge. The principle transcends time. When you remove an enemy's ability to maneuver, you remove their chance to survive. But here's where it gets fascinating: this strategy isn't confined to war. Football coaches use it in plays that trap defenders between blockers and ball carriers. Chess masters pin pieces against the board's edge before delivering the knockout blow. Even in business, companies like Apple have employed a version of it, locking customers into ecosystems with hardware, the anvil, before striking with irresistible software services, the hammer. The core idea remains: control the space and you control the outcome. Yet the hammer and anvil's true brilliance lies in its psychological toll. An encircled enemy doesn't just lose physically, they lose hope. Ancient armies knew panic spread faster than any charge when soldiers realized there was no escape. Modern studies of crowd behavior show the same pattern. Trapped people make desperate, often fatal decisions. That's why this tactic endures, because whether on a battlefield or a basketball court, the greatest advantage isn't strength, it's the removal of options. Alexander's legacy teaches us that victory often belongs to those who think in dimensions. While others saw flat battle lines, he saw a forge, a place where pressure and momentum could be orchestrated. Today, that lesson echoes wherever competition exists, because when you're the one holding both the hammer and the anvil, the fight is already over. Nothing disarms suspicion faster than a familiar flag fluttering in the wind. For centuries, pirates mastered this deception, sailing under the colors of friendly nations until they were close enough to strike. By the time their victims realized the ruse, it was too late. The Jolly Roger would rise and grappling hooks would find their mark. This wasn't just piracy, it was psychological warfare where trust became the Trojan Horse. The false flag strategy turns identity into a weapon, proving that sometimes the most dangerous enemy is the one you never see coming. History's most cunning operatives understood this power. During World War II, German U-boats occasionally flew British or neutral flags to evade detection, only revealing their true allegiance at the last possible moment. The British returned the favor with Operation Mincemeat, floating a corpse with forged papers to convince the Nazis of a non-existent Allied invasion plan. Even the American Revolution saw colonists disguising ships as British vessels to infiltrate supply lines. The brilliance lay not in the disguise itself, but in the chaos it created. When you can't trust the symbols meant to protect you, every shadow becomes a threat. Modern warfare has elevated this tactic to an art form. Cyberattacks regularly originate from servers masked behind layers of proxy nations, leaving victims guessing whether they've been hit by a rival state or freelance hackers. Russian operatives allegedly posed as Ukrainian partisans during the annexation of Crimea, while hackers from North Korea have been caught using Chinese infrastructure to launch attacks. The goal isn't just concealment, it's sowing doubt, because in the digital age, attribution is the new battleground. If you can't prove who attacked you, how do you retaliate? Yet the false flag's reach extends far beyond conflict. Corporations face it when competitors plant fake reviews or leak misleading data under assumed identities. Social media platforms grapple with bot networks masquerading as ordinary users to manipulate public opinion. Even nature has its versions. Think of harmless butterflies that mimic the vibrant patterns of toxic species to avoid predators. The lesson is universal. Perception shapes reality more than facts ever could. What makes this strategy so enduringly effective is its exploitation of a fundamental human weakness: our reliance on shortcuts. We trust flags, uniforms, and logos because processing every detail would be exhausting. The false flag preys on that laziness, weaponizing our cognitive biases. But there's a chilling twist. The more we're aware of the tactic, the more we risk seeing false flags where none exist. Paranoid governments have used this very fear to justify crackdowns on dissent, claiming protests or attacks were staged by outside agitators. The ultimate power of the false flag lies in its ambiguity. Like a magician's misdirection, it forces you to question not just what you're seeing, but whether you can trust your own eyes. Because in a world where anyone can wear any mask, the greatest victory isn't defeating your enemy, it's convincing them they were never fighting you in the first place. What if the surest path to victory wasn't fighting at all? Meet the Fabian Strategy, warfare's greatest paradox, where winning means refusing to battle on your enemy's terms. During the Second Punic War, Rome faced its nightmare scenario. Hannibal, the Carthaginian genius, had crossed the Alps with war elephants and annihilated every army sent against him. Conventional wisdom demanded another grand confrontation, but one man saw a different path. Fabius Maximus, nicknamed the Delayer, did the unthinkable. He ordered his legions to avoid open combat entirely. Fabius's approach was radical yet simple. His forces shadowed Hannibal's army across Italy, cutting supply lines, ambushing foraging parties, and disappearing into the hills whenever battle loomed. To proud Romans accustomed to glorious charges, this seemed cowardly. But Fabius understood something profound. Hannibal's strength lay in decisive battles, while Rome's power was its vast resources and manpower. By denying the Carthaginians their preferred fight, Fabius turned time itself into a weapon. Crops burned, roads blocked, allies pressured. Slowly, inexorably, Hannibal's invincible army began starving, fracturing, and weakening not from any single defeat, but from 1,000 tiny cuts. The brilliance of this strategy lies in its counterintuitive patience. Like a judo master using an opponent's momentum against them, Fabius leveraged Hannibal's very success, his battlefield supremacy, into a liability. The Carthaginian general became a frustrated tourist in Italy, winning skirmishes but unable to force the war-ending victory he needed. Meanwhile, Roman factories kept producing weapons, fresh legions kept training, and public opinion slowly shifted as people saw Hannibal's impotence. By the time Scipio Africanus finally defeated Hannibal at Zama, the foundation had been laid by Fabius's years of calculated avoidance. Modern parallels abound. During the American Revolution, George Washington employed Fabian tactics against the British, preserving his outmatched Continental Army through hit-and-run attacks. Vietnamese guerrillas used similar methods against French and later American forces, trading space for time until superior firepower became irrelevant. Even in business, companies like Amazon have waged Fabian-style price wars, absorbing short-term losses to outlast competitors with deeper pockets. The strategy transcends combat. It's about recognizing when refusing to engage is the smartest form of resistance. But here's the twist: the Fabian strategy demands extraordinary discipline. It requires leaders to withstand accusations of cowardice, publics to tolerate prolonged hardship, and armies to master complex maneuvering. When British General Wellington called his Fabian style Iberian campaign, the art of making war without fighting, he captured its essence, because the true test isn't avoiding battle, it's knowing exactly when and how to finally strike. That moment of transition, from delay to decisive action, is where Fabian's heirs either triumph or fail. Just as Rome did at Zama, the patient predator must eventually bare its teeth. Perhaps the most fascinating application today is in cybersecurity, where defense in depth mimics Fabian tactics, not stopping attacks outright, but slowing and frustrating hackers until they abandon the effort. Or in politics, where opposition parties sometimes let unpopular governments exhaust themselves through self-inflicted crises. The Fabian strategy reminds us that sometimes the strongest position isn't forward or backward, it's sideways, always moving, never quite where the enemy expects. Because in the end, wars aren't won by battles alone, but by the relentless will to keep fighting on your terms, in your time. Darkness has always been the great equalizer on the battlefield, a cloak that turns even the mightiest army into blind, disoriented prey. When the Byzantine general Belisarius faced the Vandals in North Africa in 533, he didn't just fight at night, he weaponized the chaos it created. His forces moved like shadows, striking enemy camps where sentries squinted into the blackness, unable to distinguish friend from foe. The result: panic spread faster than the blades themselves. Soldiers woke to screams and clashing steel, their formations collapsing before they could even form a defensive line. Night didn't just hide Belisarius's movement, it amplified fear in a way daylight never could. But why does darkness hold such power? Because humans are creatures of sight. Remove visibility, and instinct takes over. Heart's race, senses misfire, and discipline evaporates. Ancient commanders knew this intimately. The Mongols used night attacks to paralyze larger forces, their horsemen navigating terrain by memory while enemies stumbled. At the Battle of Trenton in 1776, Washington crossed the icy Delaware under cover of night, catching Hessian mercenaries asleep after Christmas celebrations. In both cases, the darkness wasn't just concealment, it was a psychological sledgehammer. Modern warfare has refined this ancient terror. Night vision goggles and thermal scopes might seem like equalizers, but they've only deepened the advantage of those trained to own the dark. Special operations units like the Navy SEAL or Britain's SAS treat nighttime as their natural habitat, storming compounds, gathering intelligence, or extracting hostages while their targets grapple with disorientation. Even drones now wield the night, their infrared cameras turning what was once a shield into a vulnerability. Yet the night attack's brilliance extends beyond combat. In business, disruptive startups often operate like Belisarius, launching products or pivoting strategies, while industry giants are distracted or complacent. Cybercriminals time hacks for off hours when IT defenses are thinly staffed. Even in nature, predators from owls to jaguars exploit the cover of darkness to hunt with impunity. The lesson: timing isn't just about speed, it's about striking when your opponent's senses are dulled and their guard is down. But here's the catch: mastering darkness demands more than bravery, it requires near superhuman coordination. Belisarius drilled his troops to move in silence, using predetermined signals like bird calls. Today's special forces spend years honing night navigation, learning to read terrain by touch and sound. Because the line between a flawless night assault and a fatal blunder is razor thin. One misplaced step, one accidental noise, and the hunter becomes the hunted. The night attack endures because it preys on humanity's deepest vulnerability, our fear of the unseen. Whether it's a Byzantine general silencing a camp or a hacker exploiting the midnight shift's complacency, darkness remains the ultimate ally for those daring enough to embrace it. Because in the end, the most terrifying battles aren't fought in the light, they are fought in the shadows, where victory goes to those who see without being seen. Few sights struck terror into medieval attackers like the glint of oil bubbling over castle ramparts, a harbinger of agony descending from above. The boiling oil defense wasn't just about inflicting wounds, it was psychological warfare distilled into liquid form. Imagine scaling a siege ladder, fingers gripping rough wood, only to hear the screams ahead as scalding torrents rained down, the smell of burning flesh. The slick, impossible climb as oil coated every surface. One cauldron could neutralize dozens of soldiers, turning momentum into chaos in seconds. But the true genius lay in its dual impact. While the oil maimed the first wave, the sight and sounds paralyzed those waiting below, making them question whether the next step upward was worth becoming another shrieking casualty. Castles like Crac des Chevaliers in Syria engineered their entire defensive architecture around this horror. Murder holes above gateways allowed defenders to pour oil directly onto enemies funneled into narrow spaces, maximizing both physical damage and the spectacle of suffering. The Mongols encountered this nightmare at the Siege of Baghdad in 1258, where Caliphate forces used boiling naphtha to create flaming waterfalls no armor could withstand. Yet beyond its brutality, the tactic revealed a profound military truth. Terrain could be weaponized. High walls didn't just block attacks. They transformed every stone and parapet into a force multiplier, letting small garrisons dominate much larger forces through sheer positional advantage. Fast forward to modern crowd control, and you'll find the same principle wearing different clothes. Rubber bullets, tear gas, and sonic weapons serve as 21st century boiling oil, non-lethal in theory but psychologically devastating in practice. Police forces use them not just to injure but to create visceral deterrence, banking on the crowd's memory of pain to prevent future breaches. Even in nature, animals like bombardier beetles spray boiling chemicals at predators, proving evolution long ago mastered the art of defensive escalation. But here's what medieval commanders understood that modern strategists sometimes forget: the power of spectacle. Boiling oil worked because attackers saw its effects unfold in real time. The screams, the smell, the irreversible damage. Contemporary non-lethal tools often lack that immediate horror, reducing their psychological impact. That's why some military theorists argue modern deterrents need more visible consequences to match ancient effectiveness. Yet this raises ethical dilemmas. Where's the line between necessary deterrence and gratuitous cruelty? The boiling oil's legacy endures because it represents defense at its most primal, turning sanctuary into a fortress and desperation into a weapon. Whether it's medieval garrisons buying time until reinforcements arrive or protesters scattering at the first canister's hiss, the lesson remains: sometimes the most effective defense isn't stopping your enemy. It's making them stop themselves. The most convincing lies aren't spoken, they're built. During World War II, the Allies constructed entire phantom armies out of rubber and plywood, positioning hundreds of inflatable tanks and fake airfields to convince Nazi spies that invasion forces were massing where none existed. Operation Fortitude's decoy fleet near Dover looked so convincing from aerial reconnaissance that Hitler held back 15 divisions, waiting for an attack that never came. This wasn't just trickery, it was theater on a global scale where perception dictated reality more than bullets ever could. Decoys tap into a fundamental human weakness: our tendency to focus on what's most visible rather than what's most important. Ancient hunters understood this instinctively, using animal calls and bait to lure prey into range. Chinese strategist Zhuge Liang left unmanned cities with open gates to appear vulnerable, while nomadic warriors tied branches to their horses' tails to simulate dust clouds from non-existent reinforcements. The principle transcends time. When you control what your enemy perceives, you control their decisions before the first move is made. Modern applications reveal the tactic's chilling adaptability. Tech companies leak fake product features to distract competitors from real innovations. Magicians use decoy movements to conceal sleight of hand, just as football quarterbacks use eye fakes to misdirect defenders. Even nature plays this game. Butterflies evolve false eye spots on their wings to draw predators' strikes away from vital organs. The decoy doesn't need to be perfect, it just needs to be more noticeable than the real threat. But here's where the strategy becomes art. The best decoys aren't just distractions, they're temptations. Allied planners knew Nazi intelligence would dismiss obvious fakes, so they added realistic details: laundry lines behind inflatable barracks, tire tracks near dummy tanks, even radio traffic between ghost units. Similarly, hackers today plant false data trails to send investigators down digital rabbit holes. The lesson: a decoy succeeds when it offers exactly what the enemy wants to believe. Yet there's a razor-thin line between deception and self-sabotage. Overcommit to the ruse, and you risk diverting your own resources. Undercommit, and the illusion shatters. The Allies balanced this perfectly. Their decoys drained German reserves while the real invasion force prepared elsewhere. In business or warfare, the decoy's true power lies not in the fake itself, but in the genuine opportunity it creates elsewhere. Because when your opponent's gaze is locked on the wrong target, every other move becomes invisible. The decoy's enduring brilliance lies in its simplicity. It doesn't require superior strength or technology, just superior understanding of human attention. From inflatable tanks to phishing emails, the principle remains unchanged. The easiest way to win any conflict is to let your opponent think they've already spotted your weakness. And by then, it's already too late. The Assyrians didn't just attack walls, they climbed them. their siege towers were engineering marvels, rolling fortresses that turned impenetrable defenses into mere stepping stones. Picture these wooden giants draped in wet animal hides to repel fire, inching forward on logs as archers rained arrows from their protected platforms. When the tower reached the wall, a drawbridge crashed down, unleashing soldiers directly onto the battlements. This wasn't brute force, it was brute ingenuity, transforming the battlefield's vertical dimension into an advantage. The siege tower didn't break barriers, it simply refused to acknowledge them. What made this strategy revolutionary wasn't just the machinery but the mindset. Before the Assyrians, besieging armies relied on starvation or lucky breaches. The siege tower introduced a radical idea: if you can't go through, go over. Centuries later, Alexander the Great used mobile towers at Tyre, while medieval crusaders employed them at Jerusalem. Each iteration refined the concept, proving that innovation could neutralize even the mightiest stone walls. The lesson: obstacles only remain insurmountable until someone builds a taller solution. Fast forward to modern times, and the siege tower's DNA lives on in corporate raids and tech disruptions. When Netflix shifted from DVDs to streaming, it didn't fight Blockbuster's retail dominance head-on. It scaled over it by changing the battlefield entirely. Apple's iPhone didn't compete with existing phones. It rendered them obsolete by redefining the industry's walls. Even in sports, the tower principle applies. Basketballs stretch forwards, shoot over defenders instead of battling through them. The core idea transcends time. Dominance belongs to those who elevate the conflict. Yet the siege tower's brilliance hides a paradox. While it conquers walls, it's also vulnerable, slow, flammable, and dependent on perfect execution. Assyrian engineers knew this, which is why they paired towers with sappers tunneling below and battering rams at the gates. Modern disruptors face similar balancing acts. Tesla didn't just build better cars, it created a charging network and software ecosystem to support its ascent. The siege tower teaches us that overcoming barriers requires more than height. It demands a system where every weakness is anticipated and every advantage leveraged. Perhaps the most fascinating evolution of this strategy lies in digital spaces. Hackers use privilege escalation attacks to climb over digital walls, while marketers employ viral campaigns to bypass traditional advertising barriers. Even social movements adopt siege tower tactics, using platforms like Twitter to scale over institutional gatekeepers. The Assyrians would recognize the pattern. When the ground is contested, the sky remains open. Because in the end, the greatest victories don't come from breaking down doors, they come from building ladders no one thought possible. Few formations in history command respect like the Phalanx, a living fortress where each soldier's shield protected not just himself, but the comrade to his left. Greek hoplites didn't just fight together, they moved as a single organism, their spears protruding like the quills of a porcupine. Against disorganized hordes or cavalry charges, this wall of bronze and discipline was nearly unstoppable. At the Battle of Marathon in 490 BC, 10,000 Athenians used this cohesion to crush a Persian force twice their size. The secret wasn't superior weapons or strength, it was the unbreakable bond between each man and his neighbor, where individual survival depended entirely on collective discipline. What made the Phalanx revolutionary wasn't just its military effectiveness, but its democratization of power. Unlike chariots or cavalry that required wealth to maintain, the Phalanx turned farmers and tradesmen into an unstoppable force through sheer unity. This ethos permeated Greek culture, where the concept of staying in formation became synonymous with civic duty. Modern parallels abound. Football's offensive line operates on the same principle: individual talent matters less than synchronized movement, where one breakdown can collapse the entire play. Corporations like Toyota famously borrowed this philosophy, designing assembly lines where every worker's actions interlock with precision, creating quality through collective rhythm rather than isolated heroics. Yet the phalanx's true brilliance lay in its psychological impact. Facing that advancing wall of shields, enemies didn't just confront spears. They confronted the terrifying realization that no single warrior, no matter how skilled, could break a system where each weakness was covered by another. Alexander the Great's father, Philip II, took this further by arming his phalanx with Sarissa's 18-foot pikes that created a lethal thicket no enemy could even approach. The lesson: individual excellence shines, but systemic cohesion dominates. But here's the twist: the phalanx's greatest strength was also its fatal flaw. At the Battle of Leuctra in 371 BC, the Thebans shattered Spartan invincibility by refusing to play by the rules. Instead of meeting the phalanx head-on, they stacked their left flank 50 shields deep, creating a localized battering ram that punched through Sparta's lines. Innovation had outmaneuvered tradition. Today's disruptors, from Silicon Valley startups to guerrilla marketers, follow the same playbook. Uber didn't compete with taxis on their terms. It changed the entire battlefield. The phalanx teaches us that while unity is power, rigidity is vulnerability. Perhaps the most enduring legacy of the phalanx isn't its tactics, but its metaphor. From military squads to surgical teams, success belongs to those who understand that the strongest formations aren't held together by force, but by mutual trust. Because when every shield relies on the next, victory isn't just about moving forward, it's about moving as one. The Mongol hordes didn't just move faster than their enemies, they redefined what speed meant in warfare. While medieval armies trudged 15 miles a day, Mongol riders could cover 100, switching horses at relay stations to maintain relentless momentum. This wasn't just travel, it was strategic alchemy, transforming distance into disorientation. When the Hungarian king gathered his forces near the Danube in 1241, he expected months to prepare. Instead, Batu Khan's riders appeared weeks ahead of any possible schedule, their suddenness as devastating as their arrows. The forced march turned geography into a weapon, making the impossible inevitable. What separated the Mongols wasn't their pace alone, but how they weaponized time itself. Messengers using their YAM network could cross 6,000 miles in 9 days, a system so efficient it put modern logistics to shame. By the time rumors of their approach reached a city, the dust clouds on the horizon would already confirm them. This temporal dominance created psychological shockwaves, defenders scrambling to react while still processing disbelief. The same principle fueled Napoleon's campaigns, where his marching divided, fighting united tactics allowed French columns to converge unexpectedly. Centuries later, Hitler's Blitzkrieg would echo this playbook, with panzer divisions outracing enemy communications. Modern militaries institutionalized this wisdom. Airborne brigades like the U.S. 82nd can deploy anywhere within 18 hours, while Russia's VDV troops train to seize airfields within minutes of landing. Yet the true heirs to Mongol velocity might be tech companies. Amazon's same-day delivery and Tesla's over-the-air updates prove speed still conquers markets just as it once did kingdoms. When Spotify outpaced Apple to music streaming or TikTok outmaneuvered Facebook with viral algorithms, they weren't just moving fast, they were collapsing decision cycles until competitors couldn't react. The forced march's genius lies in its dual impact, physical and psychological. Human brains are wired to expect certain timelines. Violating those expectations creates paralysis. Mongol scouts exploited this by appearing multiple places simultaneously through coordinated movement, making their army seem supernatural. Football coaches use similar tempo shifts, The no-huddle offense isn't about athleticism but breaking defensive processing. Even cybersecurity relies on this principle, where ransomware encrypts data faster than IT teams can respond. Yet this strategy demands more than stamina, it requires systemic support. The Mongols' grazing herds and mare's milk diet eliminated supply lines, while their stirrups allowed sleeping mid-gallop. Modern equivalents include the U.S. military's prepositioned stockpiles or SpaceX's rapid rocket refurbishment. Speed without sustainability is just spectacle. The difference between a forced march and a rout is whether you control the clock or it controls you. Perhaps the most fascinating evolution is in information warfare. Viral disinformation spreads at digital speeds, outpacing fact-checkers just as Mongol arrows outpaced couriers. The lesson endures. Velocity isn't about movement, it's about who dictates the tempo. Because when you own time, you own the battle before the first shot is fired. Water is life until it becomes death. The poisoned well strategy stands as one of warfare's most ruthless yet effective tactics, where victory comes not from clashing swords but from denying the most basic human necessity. Ancient commanders understood that an army without clean water dissolves faster than one facing any battlefield charge. When Roman legions besieged enemy cities, they often contaminated nearby springs with animal carcasses or toxic plants. The Assyrians went further, salting the earth and poisoning wells to ensure conquered lands remained barren for generations. These weren't acts of wanton destruction, they were calculated moves to break resistance before the first arrow flew. What makes this approach so chilling is its timeless logic. Cut off essentials, and morale evaporates faster than water in the desert. During the American Civil War, Union troops systematically destroyed Confederate salt supplies, a preservative vital for food storage, triggering malnutrition and desertion. In World War II, Allied bombers targeted German ball-bearing factories, knowing these unglamorous components were the linchpins of tank and aircraft production. The principle remains unchanged. Attack what sustains your enemy, and their strength becomes their vulnerability. Modern warfare has digitized this ancient playbook. Cyber attacks on power grids mimic the poisoned well's devastating impact. When Russian hackers disabled Ukraine's electricity in 2015, they didn't just turn off lights, they froze water pipes, silenced hospitals, and paralyzed transportation. Colonial pipelines' ransomware attack proved fuel could be weaponized just as effectively as tainted water, causing panic buying across the U.S. East Coast. The targets have changed, but the strategy endures. Identify the resource your adversary can't function without, and make it their Achilles heel. Yet the poisoned well's influence extends beyond conflict. Corporations use similar tactics when they lobby to restrict competitors' access to rare materials or patents. Activists boycott key suppliers to pressure unethical companies. Even in nature, invasive species often dominate by altering soil chemistry to make environments hostile to native plants. The strategy's brilliance lies in its indirectness. Why battle your opponent directly when you can undermine the ground they stand on? But there's a haunting lesson here about unintended consequences. Ancient armies that poisoned wells often found themselves ruling over wastelands incapable of sustaining their own troops. Modern cyber warfare risks similar blowback, as attacks on infrastructure can spread unpredictably like digital plagues. The poisoned well reminds us that victory means nothing if what remains can't support life. Because in the end, the most devastating weapon isn't the one that kills, it's the one that leaves your enemy wondering whether survival was ever possible at all. The human shield strategy turns compassion into a weapon, a brutal exploitation of the very instincts that make societies humane. Assyrian conquerors understood this psychological leverage all too well, forcing captured civilians to march ahead of their armies as living barriers. Enemy archers would hesitate to loose their arrows, knowing each shot might pierce a father, sister, or child from their own community. This wasn't just physical protection, it was moral sabotage, paralyzing defenders with the unbearable weight of collateral damage. Modern conflicts reveal the same chilling calculus. Terror groups in the Middle East have stationed fighters in hospitals and schools, while Russian forces in Ukraine reportedly used civilians as cover during their retreat from Kiev. The tactic's effectiveness lies in its asymmetry. Democratic nations, bound by ethical rules of engagement, face agonizing choices when opponents erase the line between combatant and bystander. During the Battle of Mosul, ISIS deliberately trapped families in buildings they used as sniper nests, knowing coalition airstrikes would either hold fire or endure global condemnation. Yet the human shield's power extends beyond the battlefield. Hostage takers wield it during bank standoffs, just as cybercriminals encrypt hospital databases, knowing administrators will prioritize patient lives over ransom principles. Even in nature, octopuses camouflage themselves among shells and rocks, forcing predators to risk injuring themselves while attacking. The strategy thrives wherever one side values life more than the other. What makes this approach so disturbingly brilliant is its inversion of morality. Ancient Assyrians didn't just exploit empathy, they weaponized the social contract itself. Communities that invest in protecting the vulnerable become paradoxically more vulnerable to those who exploit that protection. Modern militaries counter with precision drones and delayed assaults, but the dilemma remains. How do you defeat an enemy that turns your greatest strength into your greatest liability? The human shield's legacy forces us to confront warfare's darkest truth. Sometimes, the most effective strategies aren't about outfighting your opponent, but out-corrupting them. Because in the calculus of conflict, the side willing to cross ethical lines first often gains a fleeting advantage, at the cost of making the world infinitely more dangerous for everyone. Rome's mighty gates stood unbroken by enemy battering rams for centuries until the night traitors quietly lifted the bolts from within. The Visigoths didn't sack the Eternal City in 410 because they overpowered its defenses. They strolled through open doors, ushered in by those sworn to protect them. This wasn't just defeat, it was the ultimate betrayal, proving no walls are impregnable when trust becomes the weakest link. The double-agent strategy turns loyalty into a lethal vulnerability where the greatest threats don't storm your gates, they already hold the keys. History's most devastating breaches rarely came from outside forces. During the Crusades, the Knights Templars' downfall began when a disgraced member handed their secrets to King Philip IV. In World War II, Britain's MI5 discovered their own deputy director, Guy Burgess, was feeding classified documents to the Soviets while hosting cocktail parties for colleagues. Even the Trojan Horse, that iconic symbol of deception, relied on a collaborator, whether the priest Laocoon ignored or the citizens who dragged it inside. The pattern is clear. Systems designed to repel external attacks often crumble from invisible fractures within. Modern security experts call this the insider threat, and it's more pervasive than ever. Edward Snowden's leaks exposed how even the most advanced surveillance state can't guard against disillusioned employees with access. Corporate espionage often involves bribed IT administrators planting backdoors in company servers. Hackers increasingly target low-level employees with spear phishing emails, knowing one-clicked link from an accountant can compromise an entire network. The double agent's power lies in their legitimacy. No firewall blocks someone with the right credentials. Yet this strategy's brilliance is also its fragility. Double agents walk a razor's edge, balancing deception against exposure. Take Juan Pujol Garcia, a Spanish spy who became World War II's most consequential double agent by playing Nazi and Allied intelligence against each other. Under the codename Garbo, he fed Germany fabricated invasion plans while secretly aiding D-Day preparations so convincingly that Hitler awarded him an Iron Cross. His success came from understanding that betrayal only works when the betrayer controls the narrative. One misstep, one inconsistency, and the illusion shatters. The psychological toll makes this tactic especially potent. Discovering a traitor doesn't just compromise secrets, it erodes the very fabric of trust that holds teams together. After Aldrich Ames exposed dozens of CIA operatives to the KGB in the 1980s, the agency spent years second-guessing every relationship. Companies today face similar paralysis after insider data breaches, implementing draconian monitoring that often harms morale more than security. The double agent's true victory isn't the information they steal, but the suspicion they sow long after they're gone. Nature offers a striking parallel in parasitic cuckoos, which lay eggs in other birds' nests. The host parents raise the imposter chick, even as it pushes their own offspring to their deaths. Evolution crafted this deception over millennia, just as human strategists refined the art of the mole. Both reveal an uncomfortable truth. Systems optimized for efficiency are often vulnerable to those who know their inner workings too well. Defending against this threat requires more than technology. It demands cultural vigilance. Ancient Rome's downfall wasn't caused by a single traitor, but by a society that had grown complacent, where corruption and inequality made betrayal inevitable. Modern organizations combat insider threats not just with surveillance, but by fostering loyalty through transparency and purpose. Because in the end, the strongest defense against betrayal isn't thicker walls, it's giving people reasons to never want to open the gates. The feint is warfare's oldest magic trick, a flick of the wrist that makes armies look the wrong way while death arrives from an unexpected angle. Picture this: a Roman legion launches a thunderous assault on a city's eastern gate, drawing every defender to the ramparts. Meanwhile, silent cohorts scale the undefended western wall under cover of the commotion. By the time the enemy realizes their mistake, torches already flicker in the streets behind them. This wasn't just a tactic, it was choreographed chaos where the most convincing lies weren't spoken but staged. Napoleon wielded feints like a maestro, convincing entire nations to fortify the wrong borders. In 1805, he pretended to mass troops against England, even awarding medals for an invasion that would never come. While Austria and Russia scrambled to defend their coasts, his Grand Armée executed one of history's most brilliant pivots, marching 800 miles in just 40 days to encircle the unsuspecting Austrians at home. The lesson: sometimes the strongest attack is the one you never throw. Modern strategists have refined this art to a science. During the Gulf War's Operation Desert Storm, U.S. forces convinced Saddam Hussein they would amphibiously assault Kuwait's coast, complete with fake radio chatter and naval maneuvers. Iraqi divisions rushed to defend beaches that would remain silent, while the real coalition strike tore through the undefended western desert. Even in cybersecurity, hackers use smokescreen attacks, overwhelming firewalls with decoy breaches so the real exploit slips through unnoticed. But the feint's brilliance shines brightest beyond battlefields. Magicians employ the same principle when they force a card, making you believe you chose freely while guiding your attention elsewhere. Basketball players sell shot fakes to make defenders leap at ghosts. Even nature plays this game. Butterflies flutter erratically to confuse predators about their true flight path. The common thread: dominance belongs to those who control the narrative of attention. What makes the feint so devastating isn't the fake itself, but the timing. A poorly executed distraction only wastes energy, while a masterful one expends the enemy's focus at the exact moment it's needed elsewhere. Hannibal demonstrated this at Cannae, luring Roman legions forward with a feigned retreat before his cavalry crushed their rear. Chess grandmasters sacrifice pawns not to lose pieces, but to open lines for their queens. The feint isn't about deception, it's about synchronization, making your opponent's reaction part of your plan. Yet there's a razor's edge between genius and folly. Feints demand intimate knowledge of your adversary's psychology. When British commandos staged a fake raid near Calais in 1942, they left behind a deliberately unrealistic manual for German intelligence to find, knowing Hitler's obsession with overanalysis would make him dismiss the real Normandy plans as another ruse. The feint works because humans crave patterns even when they're being played. Today's marketers understand this instinctively. Limited time offers create artificial urgency, just as political campaigns highlight minor scandals to bury major ones. The feint endures because it exploits our brain's greatest vulnerability. We can't ignore the spectacle long enough to see the strings. Whether in war, poker, or viral media, victory often goes not to those who shout loudest, but to those who whisper in exactly the right ear. Few sights rattled ancient cavalry more than the looming silhouette of a camel on the battlefield, an animal so alien to war horses that their mere presence could turn disciplined charges into panicked stampedes. The Persian Empire's camel corps wasn't just a logistical solution for desert warfare, it was psychological warfare on four legs. By mounting archers atop these towering, foul-smelling beasts, Persian commanders exploited a quirk of equine biology. Horses instinctively fear camels' scent and erratic movements. At the Battle of Thymbra in 546 BC, Cyrus the Great deployed this living terror weapon against the Lydians, whose vaunted cavalry bolted before the first arrow flew. The brilliance lay not in creating something new, but in recognizing how the ordinary could become extraordinary when viewed through an enemy's eyes. This strategy reveals a deeper truth about innovation. It's not always about invention, but about reimagining the familiar. The Mongols later adapted this tactic by using captured camels laden with fireworks to disrupt enemy formations. During World War I, British forces painted dazzled patterns on ships to confuse German U-boat rangerfinders, turning commercial camouflage theory into naval salvation. Even today, police departments use armored construction vehicles in hostage situations, repurposing civilian machinery for life-saving ends. The Camel Corps teaches us that resources are everywhere if we're willing to see their hidden potential. Modern warfare continues this tradition of unconventional adaptation. Drone swarms now mimic the camel's disruptive role, overwhelming anti-air systems not with stealth but sheer numerical chaos. Cyber attacks repurpose everyday tech like routers or smart devices into weapons, proving that the most dangerous tools are often those already within reach. Business leaders have embraced this mentality too. Think of Netflix transforming postal DVD infrastructure into streaming dominance, or Airbnb turning empty apartments into a global lodging empire. The Persian camel masters would nod in recognition. Disruption favors those who see assets where others see obstacles, yet the Camel Corps legacy carries a warning. Like any asymmetric advantage, its power faded once opponents adapted. Arab armies later bred horses accustomed to camels, just as modern militaries develop counter-drone technologies. True innovation isn't a one-time trick, it's a mindset of perpetual reinvention, because in the end, the most formidable weapon isn't the camel, the drone, or the algorithm. It's the ability to look at the world sideways and see what everyone else has missed. The sacred band of Thebes redefined what it meant to be unstoppable, not through sheer numbers, but through bonds deeper than blood. 300 warriors, each paired with their lover, fought shoulder to shoulder in a phalanx where no man would retreat and shame his partner. This wasn't just a military unit, it was a psychological revolution where love became the ultimate combat multiplier. For 40 years, they dominated battlefields, their cohesion so flawless that even Sparta's legendary warriors couldn't break their lines. At the Battle of Leuctra in 371 BC, they shattered Sparta's myth of invincibility by refusing to die because no one fights harder than those defending what they cherish most. Modern special forces carry this legacy forward. Navy SEAL teams, SAS operatives, and Spets, as soldiers may not share the Thebans' romantic bonds, but they cultivate that same unbreakable trust through relentless training and shared hardship. When a SEAL platoon conducts a night raid, their effectiveness doesn't come from superior firepower alone. It springs from knowing each teammate's movements instinctively, like lovers anticipating each other's breaths. The Sacred Band proved what elite units still demonstrate today. Skill matters, but loyalty decides battles. Yet there's a darker edge to this brilliance. Elite units become such force multipliers that their loss can cripple morale disproportionately. The Sacred Band finally fell when Philip II of Macedon slaughtered them at Chaeronea, but only after his son Alexander, recognizing their symbolic power, deliberately targeted them to break Theban resolve. Centuries later, Hitler's obsession with capturing Crete stemmed from his desire to annihilate British paratroopers, believing their destruction would demoralize Churchill. The paradox is clear. The very excellence that makes elite units game changers also makes them glittering targets. The Sacred Band's true innovation wasn't their fighting style, but their understanding of human motivation. They weaponized intimacy, turning affection into armor. Football teams now build on this principle with unit pride, offensive lines or defensive backs bonding so tightly they perform beyond individual talent. Silicon Valley's most successful startups often emerge from friend-founder teams whose personal connections outlast setbacks. Even in nature, wolf packs and orcapods hunt more effectively through familial bonds. The lesson transcends warfare. When survival depends on the person beside you, ordinary people achieve extraordinary things. What makes elite units timeless isn't their tactics, but their reminder that warfare, like all human conflict, is ultimately emotional. The Spartans feared the Sacred Band not because they were stronger, but because they fought for something beyond orders or glory. Modern special operators describe similar clarity in life or death moments. Protecting teammates becomes the only mission that matters. The Sacred Band's ghosts whisper a truth that still shapes victories today, whether on battlefields or boardrooms. The fiercest forces aren't raised, they are forged. Abandoned tents flapping in the wind, cold campfires, and undisturbed tracks, these weren't signs of retreat, but a carefully laid trap. The Carthaginian general Hannibal turned emptiness into a weapon during the Second Punic War, leaving behind deserted encampments that whispered of panic and disorder. Roman scouts would report the enemy fleeing in disarray, only for legions to pursue straight into a slaughter. This was the false camp strategy, a masterclass in making nothingness more dangerous than any army. Hannibal's genius lay in understanding human psychology. When we see signs of abandonment, our brains jump to obvious conclusions. The enemy is weak, disorganized, defeated. The Romans, trained to expect orderly retreats or standing battles, never considered that a deserted camp could be an invitation to destruction. At Lake Trasimene, this ruse reached its peak. Hannibal left his tent standing near the shoreline while concealing troops in the surrounding hills. As Roman forces crowded into the narrow space between the water and the forest, Carthaginian soldiers emerged from the trees, turning what seemed like an easy victory into one of the most brutal ambushes in military history. Centuries later, this tactic evolved into the ghost armies of World War II. Allied forces constructed entire fake tank divisions from inflatable decoys and radio chatter, convincing Nazi reconnaissance that invasion forces were massing where none existed. The false camp had gone digital emptiness amplified by deception, with plywood trucks and canvas artillery pieces playing the role of Hannibal's abandoned tents. Even today, cybersecurity experts deploy honeypot servers, empty digital camps designed to lure hackers into wasting time attacking meaningless targets while their real systems remain hidden. But the false camp's true power isn't in the props, it's in the story it tells. Just as a magician's misdirection relies on the audience's assumptions, this strategy banks on the enemy's overconfidence. In business, corporations sometimes abandon markets or product lines, only to quietly reposition and dominate when competitors lower their guard. Nature offers its own version. Some spiders build empty, elaborate webs to distract predators from their real nests. The principle remains unchanged. What looks like weakness is often just a different kind of strength. Yet there's a razor's edge to this approach. A poorly executed false camp becomes just an empty camp, useless at best, demoralizing at worst. Hannibal succeeded because he knew the Roman mindset intimately. His deceptions were tailored to their expectations. Modern cyber honeypots fail if they're too obvious, just as inflatable tanks only work if reconnaissance can't get close enough to poke them. The false camp isn't about absence, it's about crafting the right absence for the right audience. Because in the end, the most convincing lies are the ones your enemy tells themselves. Nothing shattered an infantry line's courage like the thunder of approaching chariots, especially when their wheels spun with razor-edged blades designed to carve through flesh like wheat. The Persians didn't just charge at enemies, they turned their war carts into whirlwinds of steel, with scythes protruding from the axles and poles to hack down anyone caught in their path. At the Battle of Cunaxa in 401 BC, Cyrus the Younger's scythe chariots plowed through Greek mercenary formations, their very presence forcing soldiers to break ranks or be dismembered. This wasn't just a weapon, it was psychological theater where the spectacle of impending mutilation proved as lethal as the blades themselves. Yet for all their terror, scythe chariots were notoriously unpredictable. Horses panicked in the chaos, often veering uncontrollably or trampling their own forces, a flaw Alexander the Great exploited at Gaugamela by ordering his infantry to part like water, letting the chariots harmlessly pass through before closing ranks to slaughter the now exposed drivers. The chariot's brilliance lay not in its reliability, but in its ability to disrupt. Like a modern shock weapon, its value came from forcing enemies to abandon formation, creating vulnerabilities for follow-up attacks. That's why the principle outlasted the technology. Medieval knights adapted the concept with lance charges aimed at breaking pike walls, while World War I tanks inherited the same rolling fortresses designed to smash through trenches and sow panic. Today's battlefield has traded blades for silicon, but the doctrine remains unchanged. Military drones like the Turkish Bayraktar or American Reaper play the scythe chariot's role, not just through firepower but through the paralyzing dread of unseen threats. Insurgents in modern conflicts report that the buzzing whir of an overhead drone terrifies more than incoming artillery because it represents an invisible, unanswerable force. Even beyond warfare, shock tactics persist in corporate takeovers where sudden, aggressive moves stun competitors into inaction, or in law enforcement's use of flashbangs to incapacitate suspects before entry. The scythe chariot's legacy teaches us that true dominance isn't just about destroying the enemy, it's about dismantling their will to resist before the first blow lands. But here's the twist: shock weapons share their ancestors' fatal flaw. Just as disciplined troops learn to neutralize chariots with caltrops or controlled retreats, modern forces adapt to drones with jammers and decentralized tactics. The psychological edge only lasts until familiarity breeds contempt. That's why the most effective shock strategies, from chariots to cyberattacks, rely on novelty and unpredictability. Because terror, like any weapon, dulls with overuse, the Persians understood what drone operators know today. Sometimes the sharpest blade is the one your enemy never sees coming until it's too late. Silence could be deadly in the shadows of feudal Japan unless you stepped on a nightingale floor. These ingeniously designed floorboards, found in castles like Nijo Castle in Kyoto, chirped like birds at the slightest pressure. Far from a decorative quirk, this was an auditory alarm system centuries ahead of its time. Each plank rested on metal hinges that rubbed together when disturbed, creating a chorus of squeaks that made stealth impossible. The message was clear: every footstep would betray you. What made the nightingale floor so brilliant wasn't just the engineering, it was the psychological calculus. Unlike hidden traps or silent sentries, this defense was conspicuously loud. Potential intruders knew they couldn't avoid detection, turning the architecture itself into a deterrent. The shogun's guards didn't need to patrol every corridor, the floors sang for them. Modern security experts call this defense by announcement, where visibility, or in this case audibility, prevents breaches before they happen. Today's equivalents are everywhere, from motion-sensitive floodlights that startle prowlers to cybersecurity systems that immediately flag unauthorized access attempts. The Pentagon's canary traps plant fake documents with unique errors to trace leaks, while smart doorbells broadcast real-time alerts to homeowners' phones. Like the nightingale floor, these systems don't just detect threats, they advertise their presence, making intrusion feel feudal. Yet there's a deeper lesson in this ancient innovation. The nightingale floor exploited a universal truth: humans fear exposure more than confrontation. Burglars might risk a fight but flee at the sound of an alarm. Hackers abandon systems when they trigger logging alerts. Even in nature, brightly colored poison dart frogs face fewer predators because their vivid hues scream danger. The loudest defenses often require the least force, but the nightingale floor's legacy isn't just about noise, it's about intentional design. Modern architects now build defensible spaces where lighting, sightlines, and even landscaping subtly discourage crime. Subway platforms in Tokyo use melodic alert tones that are pleasant but impossible to ignore, blending warning with civility. The genius lies in harmonizing security with environment, proving that protection doesn't always mean brute strength. Sometimes it just means making sure every step tells a story. Imagine being an archer perched on a besieged city wall, watching in disbelief as a giant metal tortoise crawls toward your gates, arrow after arrow bouncing harmlessly off its shell. This was the Testudo, Rome's living fortress, where legionnaires transformed individual shields into an armored collective. Each soldier's rectangular scutum overlapped like scales, covering the front, sides, and even the heads of those behind them. The formation didn't just deflect projectiles, it moved with eerie synchronization, a bulldozer of flesh and iron that could scale walls or breach gates without breaking stride. At the Siege of Alesia, Julius Caesar's men used testudos to approach Gallic fortifications under hails of spears and boiling pitch, proving that mobility and defense weren't opposites but partners in conquest. The genius of the testudo lay in its simplicity. Unlike static fortresses, this was protection you could take anywhere. Riot police today employ near-identical tactics, their overlapping shields forming advancing walls against thrown objects or crowd surges. Football teams use similar principles in wedge formations to protect ball carriers, while medieval knights on horseback instinctively tightened ranks to present an unbroken wall of lances. The pattern is universal. When individuals synchronize their defenses, they create something greater than the sum of their parts, a lesson as applicable to cybersecurity firewalls as it was to Roman battlefields. Yet the Testudo wasn't invincible. Clever enemies exploited its weaknesses, pouring flammable oil that seeped between shield gaps or rolling boulders that shattered the formation's cohesion. Modern equivalents exist too. Protesters sometimes use high-pressure water jets to destabilize police lines, just as hackers flood digital defenses with traffic to find cracks in the armor. The Romans knew this vulnerability intimately, which is why the Testudo was never their only tool, but part of a broader tactical ecosystem. Like a hermit crab, it thrived when the situation matched its design, but had to adapt when the environment shifted. What makes the Testudo timeless isn't its physical structure, but its philosophy. From Roman legions to modern SWAT teams, the strategy endures because it answers a fundamental question: how do you stay safe while moving forward? Startups echo this when they bundle resources to weather market volatility. Just as migratory birds fly in V formations to conserve energy, the Testudo reminds us that progress often depends not on abandoning protection, but on reimagining it as something dynamic, because the best defenses aren't walls that make you stationary, but shields that move with you. The most convincing distress call isn't a cry for help, it's a death sentence in disguise. Caribbean pirates mastered this cruel ruse, flying friendly flags or lighting false beacons to draw merchant ships into range. When the unsuspecting captain closed in to offer aid, the Jolly Roger would rise and grappling hooks would find their mark. This wasn't just deception, it was psychological warfare where compassion became the ultimate weakness. The bait-and-switch strategy weaponizes trust, proving that the surest way to disarm someone isn't with force, it's by first convincing them they're safe. Modern cybercriminals operate on the same principle. A single email disguised as a password reset from a trusted company can compromise an entire corporation's network. Hackers call this spear phishing, where the bait isn't a distress flag but a familiar logo or a colleague's name. The psychology remains identical to those 18th century pirate ships. Humans are wired to lower their guard when they believe they're helping or responding to authority. In 2023 alone, over 300 million phishing attempts were reported globally, proof that the bait and switch isn't just surviving in the digital age, it's thriving. Yet the strategy's brilliance extends far beyond crime. Nature offers its own versions. Anglerfish dangle glowing lures to attract prey, while some orchids mimic female insects to trick males into pollinating them. Even in business, loss leader pricing mirrors the tactic. Supermarkets sell milk at a loss to lure customers into buying higher margin items. The core mechanism is universal. Dangle something irresistible, and the target's own instincts will do the rest. What makes the bait and switch so devastating is its asymmetry. Pirates risked little by flying a false flag, just as phishing scams cost hackers almost nothing to execute. The victim, however, pays dearly, whether in plundered cargo or stolen data. Military history is littered with adaptations of this approach. During World War II, British intelligence fed false intelligence to Nazi spies, convincing them the D-Day invasion would target Calais instead of Normandy. The Allies didn't just switch the bait, they let the enemy hook themselves. But here's the haunting twist. The tactic preys on our best traits: empathy, trust, and cooperation. Pirate ships exploited maritime codes of honor, just as modern scammers exploit corporate protocols or social media's interconnectedness. Defending against it requires more than skepticism. it demands systems that verify before trusting. Two-factor authentication, employee training, and blockchain verification all serve as modern-day lookouts, scanning for mismatches between the promise and the reality. The bait and switch endures because it doesn't fight human nature, it harnesses it. Whether through a pirate's flag, a phishing email, or a supermarket bargain bin, the lesson remains. The easiest way to control someone's actions is to first control their expectations. Because in the end, the most dangerous traps aren't the ones we see coming, they're the ones we walk into willingly. A Spartan hoplite's shield wasn't just armor, it was a covenant. When a warrior raised his bronze-faced aspes, its curved edges overlapped seamlessly with his neighbors, transforming individual defense into an unbreakable wall. But the true genius lay in its design. The shield's grip wasn't centered for personal comfort. It was anchored near the rim, forcing the bearer to extend his arm, covering not just his own body but the vulnerable right side of the man beside him. This wasn't just equipment, it was philosophy cast in wood and metal. Your survival depended on protecting your brother, and his on protecting you. The Spartans took this principle to its starkest conclusion. Mothers famously told sons going to war, "Return with your shield or on it." To abandon your aspes wasn't just cowardice, it was betrayal, leaving your entire formation exposed. At Thermopylae, when 300 Spartans held off Persia's thousands, their shields didn't just stop arrows, they became the teeth of a killing machine. Locked together, these interwoven barriers created a phalanx that advanced like a single organism, where each man's offense relied entirely on his neighbor's unwavering defense. Modern alliances echo this ancient logic. NATO Article 5, the Collective Defense Clause, is essentially a geopolitical aspes. When one member is attacked, all respond, not out of charity but because vulnerability anywhere weakens security everywhere. The same principle powers workplace safety protocols where employees watch for hazards not just for themselves but for their team. Even cybersecurity frameworks now emphasize defense in depth, where each layer of protection reinforces the others, creating a digital phalanx against breaches. Yet the hoplite's shield carries a darker lesson about interdependence. At the Battle of Leuctra in 371 BC, the Thebans shattered Spartan dominance by deliberately targeting their commanders. Without leadership, the shield wall lost cohesion, proving that collective systems are only as strong as their weakest link. Today's supply chain crises mirror this flaw. When one critical factory fails, global industries sputter. The brilliance of mutual reliance is also its fragility. It demands universal commitment. Nature offers its own versions of this pact. Meerkats post sentinels to watch for predators while others forage. Bees share temperature regulation duties in the hive. Even our cells operate on this principle. When mitochondria fail, neighboring cells send rescue signals. The hoplite's legacy isn't about shields, it's about recognizing that true strength flows not from solitary might, but from the invisible threads binding us together. The Spartans would nod at modern firefighting teams where each member's gear includes an emergency air supply, not for themselves but to share with a trapped colleague. Or at open-source software communities where coders patch vulnerabilities for systems they don't even use, understanding that digital security is collective. The shield's curve endures wherever people grasp a fundamental truth. Survival isn't a solo mission. It's a pact forged in bronze, blood, or bites that we either uphold together or lose alone. A burning ship careening toward an anchored fleet isn't just an attack, it's a force of nature unleashed. The fire ship strategy turned naval warfare into theater of the macabre, where the stage was water and the props were floating infernos. Picture this: aging Greek triremes, stripped of valuables and packed with pitch-soaked timber, their masts rigged with sails dipped in tar. Crews would light the fuse, steer toward enemy lines, then leap into rowboats at the last moment, leaving their flaming hulks to collide with horrified adversaries. At the Battle of Salamis in 480 BC, these maritime missiles devastated Persian ships huddled too close together, their sails catching fire like tinder in a gale. This wasn't just destruction, it was physics weaponized, where wind and current did as much damage as the flames themselves. What makes fire ships chillingly brilliant isn't their complexity, but their economy. They transformed liabilities, old vessels too costly to maintain, into assets more devastating than any warship. The Spanish Armada learned this brutally in 1588, when English fireships sent their tightly packed fleet scrambling into the North Sea's deadly shoals. Even nature plays this game. Some species of ants explode their own bodies to spray enemies with toxic chemicals, proving sacrifice can be the ultimate equalizer. The fire ship's lesson: when outmatched, sometimes the most powerful move is to turn your weaknesses into weapons. Modern warfare has digitized this ancient terror. Kamikaze drones like Ukraine's Sea Baby, unmanned boats packed with explosives echo those flaming triremes, striking Russian warships where traditional navies can't reach. During the Gulf War, Iraqi forces released oil into the Persian Gulf and lit it ablaze, creating firewalls against amphibious landings. Even in cybersecurity, logic bombs serve as digital fire ships' dormant code that detonates when triggered, sacrificing systems to cripple infiltrators. The principle transcends time. Desperation fuels innovation faster than prosperity ever could. Yet the fire ship's true power lies in its psychological shockwave. Watching an unstoppable wall of fire advance across water doesn't just sink ships, it shatters morale. Dutch Admiral Michiel de Ruyter exploited this in 1667 by sending fireships into a British fleet at anchor, causing panic so total that sailors abandoned fully functional warships. Today's militaries harness similar terror with blinding laser weapons or sonic cannons that induce disorientation. The goal isn't just to damage, it's to overwhelm the enemy's capacity to react. But here's the paradox: fire ships succeed because they're unexpected. Once they became standard tactics, navies adapted by posting picket boats to intercept them and anchoring in open formations. Modern drone swarms face the same challenge. Their effectiveness diminishes as defenses evolve. The lesson: sacrificial strategies work best when they're surprises, not staples. Like a chess player sacrificing their queen, the move only delivers checkmate if the opponent never saw it coming. Beyond warfare, the fire ship's DNA lives in disruptive innovation. Startups often burn their old business models to disrupt industries, just as Netflix torched its DVD division to dominate streaming. Environmental activists deploy floating barriers to block oil tankers, turning their small numbers into outsized impact. Even in nature, wildfires clear the way for new growth. The fire ship reminds us that sometimes the path forward isn't around the flames, it's straight through them. Because when you have nothing left to lose, that's when you discover what truly burns brightest. The most convincing illusions aren't performed with smoke and mirrors, they're orchestrated with entire armies. During World War II, Soviet commanders didn't just hide their plans from the Nazis. They constructed elaborate lies so convincing, even their own troops sometimes believed them. This was Masquerovka, Russia's centuries-old doctrine of strategic deception, where perception wasn't just managed but manufactured. At the Battle of Kursk in 1943, the Red Army staged phantom tank divisions using wooden decoys and fake radio traffic, tricking German reconnaissance into overestimating Soviet weakness. Meanwhile, real forces massed unseen, waiting to spring history's largest tank battle on an enemy who never saw it coming. Masquerovka's brilliance lay in its layers. Unlike simple camouflage, this was theater on a continental scale, dummy airfields with plywood planes, conscripted peasants marching in loops to simulate troop movements, even inflatable missile silos convincing enough to draw actual NATO airstrikes during the Cold War. The Soviets didn't just want to conceal their strength, they wanted to dictate what their enemies perceived as reality. Modern cybersecurity experts call this perception hacking, where the goal isn't to steal data, but to corrupt the victim's understanding of what's real. Russian hacker groups like Fancy Bear have weaponized this legacy, blending real leaks with fabricated documents to create unresolvable confusion, whether about election interference or chemical weapons. Yet Masquerovka's most disturbing evolution isn't on battlefields or computer servers, it's in our news feeds. Social media disinformation campaigns apply the same principles Stalin's generals used. Flood the zone with conflicting narratives until truth becomes irrelevant. During the 2016 U.S. election, Kremlin-linked troll farms didn't just promote one false story. They amplified extremes on all sides, from fabricated Black Lives Matter posts to fake white supremacist accounts. Like those World War II decoy tanks, the goal wasn't to convince anyone of a specific lie, but to erode the very idea that objective facts exist. Nature offers eerie parallels to this strategy. Some octopuses mimic multiple sea creatures simultaneously, flashing colors of a lionfish here, textures of coral there, not to perfectly impersonate any one species, but to create sensory overload that paralyzes predators' decision-making. Masquerovka operates the same way. When every piece of intel could be true or false, hesitation becomes the deadliest weapon of all. The Doctrine's true power lies in its patience. While Western militaries often prioritize speed and precision, Masquerovka plays the long game, planting seeds of doubt that might take years to bear fruit. Soviet spies during the Cold War would subtly alter maps or scientific reports just enough to send Western agencies down costly dead ends. Today's corporate espionage sometimes follows this playbook, with competitors leaking slightly altered designs to sabotage product launches without ever firing a shot. But here's the twist: Masquerovka's greatest weakness is its success. As the world grows wise to these tactics, their effectiveness diminishes until the deceiver must escalate to ever more elaborate ruses. The Kremlin's recent struggles in Ukraine reveal this paradox. After years of hybrid warfare, their playbook has become predictable. Like a magician whose audience knows all his tricks, the illusionist must now work twice as hard for half the impact. Yet the Doctrine's core lesson endures. In war, politics, or business, the side that controls what others believe controls the battlefield itself, no matter how far that battlefield strays from reality. The Cantabrian Circle transformed horseback archery into a lethal ballet, a swirling vortex of hooves and arrows that whittled down enemies with mathematical precision. Picture this: Spanish horsemen of antiquity riding in tight, continuous loops around their targets, each rider firing arrows at the exact moment he faced the enemy before rotating away to reload. This wasn't chaos, it was choreographed carnage where motion became both shield and spear. Unlike static archers who traded volleys from fixed positions, these riders created a 360-degree killing zone that advanced, retreated, or pivoted on command. At the Battle of Carrhae in 53 BC, Parthian horse archers used a similar tactic to annihilate Rome's legions, proving that fluidity could overcome brute force. What made the Cantabrian Circle so devastating wasn't just its firepower, but its psychological toll. Enemy infantry would watch helplessly as death circled them endlessly, their formations collapsing inward like withering flowers. The tactic exploited a fundamental weakness in human perception. Our brains struggle to track multiple fast-moving threats simultaneously. Modern helicopter gunships echo this principle with their dancing horse, strafing runs hovering briefly to unleash rockets before darting away, always staying just beyond the reach of ground fire. The Apache's Circle of Death maneuver over combat zones is essentially a jet-powered Cantabrian Circle, blending ancient geometry with rotor blades. Yet the true genius of the strategy lay in its economy of motion. Each rider's path intersected with others at precise intervals, creating overlapping fields of fire without ever crossing streams. This required drilling so rigorous that riders could maintain formation blindfolded, their horses responding to knee pressure and vocal cues alone. Today's military pilots train with similar precision, executing coordinated attack patterns where seconds and degrees separate success from friendly fire. Even in nature, wolves hunting elk use concentric circling to exhaust prey, proving that the Cantabrian Circle isn't just tactics, it's biomechanical inevitability. The strategy's modern descendants extend beyond aviation. Swarm drones now replicate the Circle's lethality, with quadcopters autonomously coordinating attack vectors like digital horse archers. On a grander scale, naval carrier groups employ the same principal ships and aircraft, maintaining constant movement to present no static target while projecting firepower in all directions. Even cybersecurity, honeypot networks mimic the Circle, luring hackers into loops of decoy servers that drain their resources without ever offering a stationary breach point. But here's the twist: the Cantabrian Circle's brilliance is also its limitation. It thrives in open terrain but falters in forests or cities where movement constricts. Mongol riders adapted by switching to looser, swarm tactics in tight spaces, just as modern spec ops teams alternate between rapid maneuvers and static ambushes. The lesson endures: mobility kills, but only when the environment permits. Whether with hooves, rotors, or algorithms, the dance of death remains the same, a relentless revolution where staying still means surrender. Swedish King Charles XII didn't just defend his army, he transformed it into a moving fortress bristling with lethal edges. During the Great Northern War in the early 1700s, his forces perfected the Hedghog Defense, circling supply wagons and lashing them together into makeshift strongholds. Each wagon became a rampart, its wheels chained to neighbors, while gaps between them bristled with muskets, pikes, and artillery. Attackers charging these formations didn't just face return fire, they met an interconnected web of death where every angle exposed them to overlapping kill zones. This wasn't just a barricade, it was defense reimagined as an ecosystem, where weakness in one sector was covered by strength in another. The brilliance of the hedgehog lay in its deceptive simplicity. Unlike static forts that could be bypassed, these mobile citadels allowed Charles's outnumbered troops to dominate open terrain. At the Battle of Holocene in 1708, his forces repelled a Russian army 3 times their size by anchoring their position between 2 impassable swamps, then luring enemies into the killing field between their wagon forts. The Russians, unable to flank or overwhelm the hedgehogs, broke against them like waves on a spiked shore. The lesson was clear: true defense isn't about hiding behind walls, it's about making every approach cost more than the enemy can afford. Modern militaries have adapted this ancient wisdom to contemporary threats. Taiwan's anti-invasion strategy essentially transforms the entire island into a 21st century hedgehog, with coastal missile batteries, underground airbases, and urban strongpoints designed to make amphibious landings suicidal. Each defensive layer, from sea mines to portable anti-tank missiles, serves as a porcupine's quill, individually sharp, collectively impenetrable. The Marine Corps New Force Design 2030 mirrors this philosophy, trading heavy armor for distributed networks of missile teams that can disperse and regroup like metallic hedgehogs across Pacific Islands. But the hedgehog's influence extends beyond warfare. Cybersecurity experts now advocate defense in depth, where firewalls, encryption, and intrusion detection systems create digital quills to deter hackers. Even wildlife employs versions of this strategy. Armadillos curl into armored balls, while echidnas erect spines when threatened. The core principle transcends time. Survival belongs not to the strongest, but to those who make attack too painful to contemplate. Yet the hedgehog defense carries a sobering paradox. Its very effectiveness can breed overconfidence. Charles XII eventually met his downfall at Poltava when logistical failures left his wagons isolated and undermanned. Modern militaries guard against similar complacency by ensuring their quills are mobile and adaptable. Taiwan's defenses, for example, emphasize rapid redeployment to avoid becoming predictable targets. The lesson endures. A hedgehog survives not just by its spikes, but by knowing when to scurry to new ground. Because in the end, the best defense isn't just being unbreakable, it's making your enemies realize they're the ones who'll shatter against you. Lone wolves rarely survive war, but a pack can bring down giants. The Wolfpack Strategy rewrote naval warfare in World War II, turning individual U-boats into a synchronized killing machine. German Admiral Karl Dönitz didn't just send submarines to hunt Allied convoys. He orchestrated them like a conductor leading an orchestra of predators. When one U-boat spotted a target, it didn't attack alone. Instead, it shadowed the convoy while radioing coordinates to nearby submarines. Within hours, a dozen or more would converge, striking from multiple directions under cover of darkness. The result, escort ships couldn't defend everywhere at once, and merchant vessels became sitting ducks in a deadly crossfire. During the peak of the Battle of the Atlantic, these wolfpacks sank over 200 ships in a single month, proving that isolation is weakness, but coordination is annihilation. What made the Wolfpack so devastating wasn't just the number of U-boats, but their networked intelligence. Each submarine functioned as both hunter and sensor, feeding real-time data to the pack. This allowed the Germans to exploit gaps in convoy defenses with surgical precision, like wolves isolating the weakest caribou in a herd. Modern militaries have digitized this ancient principle. Swarm drones now operate with eerie similarity. A single operator can deploy dozens of autonomous drones that communicate mid-flight, overwhelming air defenses by sheer multiplicity. Ukraine's use of explosive-laden sea drones against Russia's Black Sea fleet mirrors the Wolfpack's tactics, with small, cheap vessels ganging up on warships worth billions. Yet the Wolfpack's true brilliance lies in its scalability. Guerrilla fighters from Vietnam to Afghanistan have adapted its core premise: decentralized cells, loosely coordinated but lethally synchronized. The Viet Cong's hit-and-run ambushes functioned like aquatic wolf packs, vanishing into jungle trails after striking. Even in nature, the strategy transcends species. Orcas hunt seals by creating waves to wash them off ice floes, while army ants overwhelm prey through sheer collective motion. The lesson is universal. When individuals act as a distributed brain, they achieve what solo players cannot. But here's the twist: the Wolfpack's strength is also its vulnerability. Allied forces eventually cracked the U-boat menace by cracking their communications. Codebreakers at Bletchley Park decrypted German naval messages, allowing convoys to reroute away from waiting packs. Today, electronic warfare systems jam drone swarms' signals, turning synchronized killers into disoriented hazards. The Wolfpack thrives on connection but collapses when that connection is severed. From boardrooms to basketball courts, the strategy endures. Corporate raiders coordinate hostile takeovers through investor syndicates, while basketball teams use swarm defense to trap ball handlers. The Wolfpack teaches us that the future belongs not to the strongest individual, but to the most seamlessly connected collective, because in the end, the deadliest predators aren't those with the sharpest teeth, they're the ones who hunt together. War isn't always about pushing forward sometimes, it's about collapsing an enemy's entire world at once. The Soviet deep battle doctrine redefined modern warfare by attacking not just front lines, but the very systems that kept an army functioning. Picture this: while tanks smashed through enemy positions, airborne troops dropped behind lines to sabotage supply depots, partisans blew up railways, and artillery hammered command centers, all synchronized to the minute. This wasn't a series of skirmishes, it was a symphony of destruction where every instrument played its part to shatter the opponent's ability to think, react, or even comprehend where the real threat lay. At the Battle of Kursk, this multi-layered onslaught didn't just defeat the Germans, it left them paralyzed, unable to distinguish the primary assault from the decoys, the real crisis from the manufactured chaos. The genius of deep battle lay in its rejection of single-point offensives. Traditional warfare often resembled a battering ram, concentrated force against a weak spot. But Soviet theorists like Mikhail Tukhachevsky envisioned war as a living organism, where victory came from attacking the nervous system, not just the limbs. Modern cyberwarfare operates on the same principle. A hacker doesn't just breach a company's firewall, they might simultaneously overwhelm servers with a DDoS attack, spear phish employees to steal credentials, and plant malware in supply chain software, creating so many fires that defenders can't possibly extinguish them all. Russia's cyber assaults on Ukraine in 2022 followed this exact playbook, disabling government websites, hijacking satellite internet, and leaking fabricated documents, all while kinetic missiles rained down. The goal wasn't just damage, but systemic overload. Yet deep battle's influence extends far beyond conflict. Tech monopolies use similar saturation tactics, flooding markets with products, acquisitions, and patents until competitors simply can't keep up. Political campaigns bombard voters with ads, social media bots, and targeted messaging across every platform, knowing that resistance crumbles under sheer volume. Even nature understands this strategy. Army ants don't target prey individually, they swarm in such numbers that escape becomes impossible. The lesson is universal. When you strike everywhere at once, your enemy's strength becomes irrelevant. But here's the twist: deep battle's greatest strength is also its most demanding requirement: flawless coordination. Soviet success depended on precise timing between infantry, armor, and air support, a complexity that often faltered in practice. Modern multi-vector cyberattacks face the same challenge. One misaligned component can alert defenders to the entire operation. Ukraine's ability to repel Russia's cyber offensives came from recognizing this, monitoring not just individual threats, but the patterns connecting them. The true masters of deep battle don't just create chaos, they orchestrate it, conducting disintegration like a maestro wielding a baton. What makes this strategy timeless is its chilling efficiency. Why defeat an army when you can dissolve its will to fight? Why hack a server when you can erase trust in the entire network? From the Eastern Front to the digital frontier, deep battle proves that the most devastating victories aren't won by overpowering your enemy. They're won by making the very concept of resistance impossible. Because when every horizon burns at once, surrender isn't a choice, it's the only direction left. Alexander the Great didn't just lead armies, he weaponized his own myth. Before his troops even drew their swords, his reputation alone could fracture enemy morale. Stories of his invincibility spread like wildfire, how he unraveled the Gordian knot with a single stroke, how he wept when there were no more worlds to conquer, how he marched his men across deserts without water just to prove it could be done. By the time he faced Darius III at Gaugamela, Persian soldiers already saw him as something more than human. This wasn't just leadership, it was psychological alchemy, turning charisma into a force as tangible as any phalanx. Modern warlords and CEOs have refined this ancient playbook. Consider Elon Musk. Whether tweeting memes or launching cars into space, he's crafted a persona so larger than life that Tesla's stock fluctuates on his whims. Or look at political figures like Volodymyr Zelensky, whose transformation from comedian to wartime icon rallied a nation to resist against impossible odds. The cult of personality doesn't just inspire loyalty, it paralyzes opposition. When Steve Jobs returned to Apple in 1997, his mere presence reignited belief in a company many had written off. Employees worked 90-hour weeks not for bonuses, but because they wanted to be part of his reality distortion field. But here's the dark genius of this strategy. It thrives on ambiguity. Alexander cultivated rumors of divine parentage, just as modern leaders carefully curate their origin stories. Napoleon's propagandists painted him as both a man of the people and a demigod of war. Even brutal regimes understand the power of myth. Kim Jong-un state media claims he could drive at age 3 and compose operas at 9. The lesson is universal. When facts blur into legend, doubt becomes heresy. Yet the cult of personality is a double-edged sword. For every Alexander uniting an empire, there's a Hitler leading his people to ruin. Charisma without competence is a time bomb. Theranos Elizabeth Holmes mesmerized investors with her black turtleneck and deep voice, but the absence of real science doomed her vision. Modern movements grapple with this tension, from cryptocurrency gurus promising utopia to fitness influencers selling unattainable perfection. The line between inspiration and exploitation blurs where personality becomes propaganda. Nature offers a stark parallel in the animal kingdom. Alpha wolves lead packs not through brute strength alone, but through presence. Their posture, gaze, and energy dictate the group's survival. Human societies operate similarly. Studies show employees will endure lower pay for a leader they believe in, while soldiers under respected officers perform better with identical resources. The cult of personality isn't about deception, it's about channeling belief into collective action. The most fascinating evolution of this tactic lies in the digital age. Social media has democratized myth-making. Anyone can craft a persona that bends reality. Influencers amass armies of followers who trust their recommendations over experts. Politicians bypass traditional media, speaking directly to supporters through curated live streams. Even terrorists now understand branding, producing slick videos that transform thugs into anti-heroes. The battlefield hasn't disappeared, it's migrated to the algorithms that shape our perceptions. Alexander's ghost whispers a timeless truth. Leadership isn't just about strategy or resources. It's about constructing a narrative so compelling that others willingly surrender their doubt. Whether on ancient battlefields or corporate boardrooms, the cult of personality remains the ultimate force multiplier, because when people believe in the legend more than the facts, reality itself becomes negotiable. From feigned retreats to psychological warfare, these 34 strategies reveal a universal truth. Brilliance in conflict isn't about raw strength, but the alchemy of ingenuity. Across millennia, the most legendary commanders, from Sun Tzu to Zhu Zhiliang, Hannibal to Belisarius, understood that battles are won long before the first arrow flies. They're won in the minds of those who dare to see the battlefield differently. who turn weaknesses into weapons and obstacles into opportunities. The empty fort isn't just a ruse, it's a masterclass in leveraging perception. The Scorched Earth isn't mere destruction, it's the art of making surrender inevitable by removing the very ground an enemy stands on. What makes these tactics timeless isn't their brutality, but their adaptability. The same principles that toppled empires now shape boardroom negotiations, political campaigns, and even personal challenges. A startup founder executing a Fabian strategy, avoiding direct competition while starving rivals of market share, is wielding the same patience that defeated Hannibal. A negotiator using the Trojan Horse approach, packaging hard truths inside palatable offers, is channeling ancient deception for modern diplomacy. Even in everyday life, recognizing when to feign retreat from an argument or construct a siege tower around a stubborn problem can turn deadlocks into breakthroughs. But here's the most liberating lesson. These strategies aren't relics, they're blueprints. The Mongols didn't have drones, but their forced marches live on in Silicon Valley's blitzscaling. The Spartans lacked social media, but their cult of unity mirrors today's most resilient teams. History's greatest minds left behind more than victories. They left a playbook for reimagining the impossible. So whether you're facing a corporate giant, a personal crisis, or just a day that feels like a battlefield, remember, the tools are already in your hands. The question isn't whether these strategies still work, it's whether you'll recognize the moment to deploy them. Now it's your turn. Which of these ancient masterstrokes resonates most with your battles? Is it the Wolfpack's unity, the Hedgehog's defiance, or the Anaconda's slow squeeze? Drop your favorites in the comments, and if you've ever outmaneuvered a challenge using one of these tactics, share the story. The conversation doesn't end here. Smash that subscribe button to keep unlocking history's hidden playbooks, because the past isn't just a story. It's the ultimate strategist, waiting to whisper its secrets to those